These are regular German laws that are applied every single day, but what many people don't know is that they were originally written over 80 years ago by the Nazi regime. Hello, servus, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Feli. I'm originally from Munich, Germany, but I've been living here in Cincinnati, Ohio, on and off since 2016. Here in the US, having laws that are older than 80 years isn't really something out of the ordinary. That's pretty standard, actually. I mean, this country and its constitution, so the fundamental principles and values of the country, are over 200 years old. But in Germany, as you can imagine, when a law is over 80 years old, that means that it goes back to a pretty dark time in German history, the Third Reich. Now, modern-day Germany is not the same country anymore as that Germany. After the end of World War II, the borders were readjusted, Germany was split up, and in 1949, a new German state was founded, the Federal Republic of Germany, Bundesrepublik Deutschland, with a new constitution, new laws, and the mission of denazification, which was something that the Allied powers had started right after the war ended in 1945. And rightly so. However, instead of drafting every single law for this new country from scratch, a lot of the previously existing laws were simply adapted. As long as they aligned with the fundamental principles of the new German state, the Freiheitlich-Demokratische Grundordnung, which loosely translates to liberal democratic basic order. So a free and anti-totalitarian political structure. Of course, laws that were clearly violating those principles, such as laws that were discriminatory or were obviously serving the purpose and ideology of the Nazi regime, were fully abolished. But laws that seemed rather apolitical and harmless, that were simply regulating everyday situations, were often just slightly adjusted, rephrased, and carried over into the new German state. And in some cases, laws were even kept the exact same. And even though the Federal Republic of Germany is over 70 years old now, which means there has been a lot of time for potential law changes, there are still about 30 laws in place today that are remnants from the Nazi regime. One of them is Section 211 of the German Criminal Code, the Strafgesetzbuch, the section about murder. Mörder ist, wer aus Mordlust, zur Befriedigung des Geschlechtstriebs, aus Habgier oder sonst aus niedrigen Beweggründen, heimtückisch oder grausam oder mit gemeingefährlichen Mitteln oder um eine andere Straftat zu ermöglichen oder zu verdecken, einen Menschen tötet. Which translates to, a murderer is whoever kills a human out of a lust to kill, to obtain sexual gratification, out of greed or other base motives, malignantly or cruelly, or by means constituting a public danger, or to facilitate or cover up another offense. This law, with the exact same wording, was originally written in 1941 by the State Secretary of the Reich Ministry of Justice, Karl Roland Freisler. He was a judge and prominent ideologue of Nazism and an attendee of the Wannsee Conference in 1942, which was the event that set the Holocaust in motion. He was killed during a bomb attack in Berlin in February of 1945. The only thing that was changed about this law when it was adapted in 1949 was the death penalty, which used to be the punishment for murder under the Nazis, but in the Federal Republic of Germany, that was fully abolished. Instead, murder in modern-day Germany is punished with imprisonment for life. In practice, that means at least 15 years in prison, after which the convict has the chance to get out on parole if they've shown good behavior. If, however, the court has declared Besondere Schwer der Schuld, which literally translates to particularly heavy guilt, so in extreme cases, the convict will be put into Sicherungsverwahrung after their time in prison, which is basically a preventive detention. Which is also a remnant from the Nazi regime, by the way. It was first established in 1933. Now, this definition of murder has been criticized in Germany for decades, and many lawyers have called for a justice reform of this section. If we take a closer look at it again, addition, you'll notice that, unlike in many other countries, in Germany, murder is not defined as a premeditated killing per se, but a killing where at least one of these characteristics applies. Any other intentional killing is usually deemed Totschlag in Germany, so manslaughter. And then there is fahrlässige Tötung, which is involuntary manslaughter or killing due to negligence. One of the main points of criticism about this law is that things like base motives or killing malignantly are such vague terms that leave a lot of room for interpretation, which makes this law tricky to apply. I mean, how do you decide what falls under a base motive and what doesn't? It's often described as motives that are at the lowest moral level, that are particularly selfish and contemptible, but doesn't that apply to most motives of murder? Now, from what I've read, this law actually benefited the Nazis themselves to commit their mass murder without falling under any of these murder categories, at least according to their interpretation of the law. Before they passed this definition of murder, it actually was defined as premeditated killing, which, of course, would have applied to their actions as well. I mean, deporting millions of people and systematically killing them is as premeditated as it gets. And since this law was carried over into the Federal Republic of Germany too, some experts say that it even ended up helping some Nazi members during their trials that they had to face after the war. Another point of criticism about this law is that it can lead to verdicts that seem unjust from a moral point of view. Like if an abusive husband were to beat up his wife to the point where she died, it would only be ruled manslaughter, but if a woman killed her abusive husband while standing behind him or while he's asleep, because she wouldn't stand a chance in a face-to-face confrontation, it would be ruled murder due to the malignant nature of the attack, because he wouldn't have been able to defend himself. Another point that's often criticized is that the law doesn't even technically define what murder is, but rather who a murderer is, implying that murderers are a certain category of people with the crime only being a symptom of their personality that they're born with, which is kind of problematic morally and doesn't align with how our modern-day justice system views perpetrators. I mean, this one and the section about manslaughter are the only two laws that are defining the nature of the perpetrator rather than the crime itself. By the way, if you want to dive a little deeper into this topic, but you don't want your internet provider to keep records of you Googling things about murder, I'd recommend downloading PIA if you haven't done so already. PIA is a so-called Virtual Private Network, for short VPN, that encrypts your internet connection and hides your IP address to protect your personal data from hackers, internet service providers, and anyone else that could potentially see your information. I always make sure to turn it on whenever I'm at the airport, at a hotel, or a coffee shop with a public Wi-Fi network, but I also use it a lot at home because this is how I'm able to watch TV shows and movies from Germany. PIA has servers in over 90 countries worldwide and all 50 states of the US, so you can simply pick which server you want to log in from, and then Netflix, Prime Video, or ESPN Plus will think that you're in that location, which means that you can access movies that are available in other countries' Netflix selections, but not in the US. When you pick a server in Japan, for example, I like to select streaming optimized, you can watch the Barbie movie on Netflix. Or if you pick a server in the UK, you can watch all 9 seasons of The Office. And this even helps to get around these local blackouts that they often put in place for sports broadcasts. Simply switching your location to a different US state can solve the problem. The best thing is that you can get 4 months of PIA completely for free if you download it through my link in the info box below or go to piavpn.com/Feli from Germany. And even after those 4 months, you'll receive an 83% discount, which means it'll only be $2.03 a month. That's literally your daily coffee, but for the whole month. And one subscription can be used on an unlimited amount of devices, so don't miss out on this. You can find the link down below to download PIA today. Another very important German law that goes back to the Nazi regime and that affects about 40% of the German population every single year is Ehegattensplitting. I know that's one of these long German words. It literally translates to spouse splitting, using the English word splitting there, and is the tax law that's applied when a married couple files their taxes together. In English, you might refer to this as income splitting. Now, the Ehegattensplitting in its current form was passed in 1958, and it's not exactly the same law as during the Third Reich, but the principle is still pretty much the same, which is why it's mainly beneficial for couples who have a big income gap, so where one partner makes significantly more money than the other. The Nazis passed this law in 1934 with the goal to encourage women to stay off the job market and be housewives and stay-at-home moms instead. That's the role that they wanted women to take on in their society. Before this, the taxation laws for married couples had actually made a lot of progress during the 1920s, making it a little more beneficial for a married woman to have her own income as well. Funny enough, after the Nazis passed this law in 1934, they actually implemented an exception for this rule only 7 years later, in 1941, when they realized that they needed women to join the workforce after all, in the arms industry. Today, Ehegattensplitting in Germany means that both incomes are added together, divided by 2, and then you can see which tax bracket you fall under, and that tax bracket then applies to both of you, and you each pay 50% of your mutual taxes. So if one partner makes 80,000 euros a year, they would usually be in the 42% tax bracket, and if the other partner, let's say, makes 20,000 euros, that would usually put them in the 24 to 42% tax bracket. But if they did income splitting, they would now both be in that 24 to 42% bracket, because 80,000 plus 20,000 is 100,000, divided by 2 is 50,000. Now, if both partners earn about the same amount of money, being married oftentimes doesn't save them any taxes, but they do also have the option to file their taxes separately. For comparison, in the US, for example, there are separately defined tax brackets for when you file as a married couple, and even though it's also more beneficial for couples who have a bigger income difference, there are a lot of additional deduction benefits for them, so for most couples in the US, it does make sense to file jointly. One of the main points of criticism about the German model, and of course in practice this gets a lot more complicated than the simple breakdown I just gave you, is that it puts a lot of couples in a situation where financially it doesn't make sense for the woman in most cases to go back to work after having a kid, or to turn her part-time job into a full-time job, because the extra money would end up causing the couple a disadvantage in their taxes, and they wouldn't actually end up with any more cash in their pockets. And why go to work if it doesn't benefit you financially, and you could have used that time for other things instead? As a consequence, a lot of women become financially dependent on their husbands, don't get to pay into their retirement funds, and long-term, this also contributes to the fact that in Germany, women are a lot more likely to suffer from poverty when they're old. Now, there are many more pros and cons about the German income splitting, but at the end of the day, knowing that this goes back to the Nazis' attempts to control women's career options definitely leaves a weird taste. And the Nazis didn't only leave us with laws regarding crime or taxes, they even influenced our holidays, like the one that's taking place tomorrow, May 1st, which is Labor Day in Germany, Tag der Arbeit. Now, the history of this day started way before the Nazi regime and actually originated here in the US with the Haymarket Affair in Chicago in 1886, where workers protested for the 8-hour workday. A lot of the people organizing this were German immigrants, by the way. The protests lasted for several days and eventually escalated, with a bomb being thrown and police shooting at protesters, and several people died. Today, the 8-hour workday is a common standard around the world. A few years after the Haymarket Affair, May 1st became an international memorial day to commemorate the victims of the riots and to continue fighting for workers' rights. But in Germany, it wasn't until 1933 that the National Socialists, aka the Nazis, officially declared it a federal holiday in Germany. For that first year, they called it Tag der nationalen Arbeit, so Day of National Work or National Labor, and they even made it a paid holiday, which to the workers' movements and the unions was literally a dream come true. In reality, however, this was just the first step in their plan to completely eliminate unions, which actually happened the very next day, on May 2nd, 1933. Still, they decided to keep May 1st as a holiday holiday, but from now on they called it Nationaler Feiertag des deutschen Volkes, so National Holiday of the German People. Together with the existing traditions of spring festivals that took place around that time, it turned into a big celebration with parades, fireworks, and Hitler giving a big speech. When the Federal Republic of Germany was founded, it stayed a public holiday in all German states, but its name and meaning went back to the roots, which is why today it's officially known as Labor Day, Tag der Arbeit. Well, except for Nordrhein-Westfalen, where they chose to call it Tag des Bekenntnisses zu Freiheit und Frieden, sozialer Gerechtigkeit, Völkerversöhnung und Menschenwürde, in order to clearly separate the day from its Nazi roots. This translates to Day of Confession of Freedom, Peace, Social Equality, International Reconciliation, and Human Dignity. And May 1st isn't just a German holiday, it's actually known as International Workers' Day and is observed by a lot of countries all over the world. On this map, it's all of the red countries. Here in the US, Labor Day is celebrated as well, but instead of May 1st, it's held on the first Monday of September. Now, of course, the Federal Republic of Germany wasn't the only German state that was founded after World War II. In the same year, the Soviet occupation zone became the Deutsche Demokratische Republik, for short DDR, or in English, the German Democratic Republic, GDR. Up until 1990, these two German countries coexisted and were colloquially known as East Germany and West Germany. That's the German state that still exists today. What's interesting is that after the collapse of East Germany, their laws were sorted out a lot more radically than it was done with the laws of the Third Reich, where pretty much everything that wasn't explicitly erased got to stay. Even our constitution, the Grundgesetz, shows remnants from the Third Reich, not necessarily in terms of legislation, but in regards to terminology. The third section of the German constitution about discrimination mentions that no person can be favored or disfavored because of sex, parentage, race, language, homeland and origin, faith, or religious or political opinions. To an American, this probably sounds completely normal, but in German, the word for race, Rasse, has become very controversial over the last few decades, and due to Germany's history, has a very different connotation than its English equivalent. I'll tell you more about that topic in my next video. The German state of Saarland actually erased the word from their state constitution earlier this year. However, the federal government just announced in February that after years of wanting to change this word in the German constitution, they're dropping these plans now due to how complicated this would be legally and because the Central Council of Jews was having doubts about this step. After all, the word Rasse in some way commemorates the persecution of millions of people in Germany, and they said that's something that should never disappear from our collective memory. If you know of any other German laws that are remnants from the Nazi regime, feel free to leave a comment down below. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so yet, and activate the bell to get notified about new videos. And if you want to find out how Hitler ruined the reputation of the German language, make sure to check out this video. And if you've always wondered what Germans learn about World War II in school and whether we talk about the Holocaust, check out this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope I'll see you next time. Tschüss!